For 3 whole centuries, one family name echoed through the halls of power, from the streets of Florence all the way to the Vatican: the Medici. We're talking about bankers who became royalty, patrons who kickstarted the Renaissance, and absolute masters of a game of power that literally shaped the modern world. It really makes you wonder, right? How on earth did a single family of bankers climb so high that they were calling the shots for kings and popes? How did they end up ruling Europe? Well, to get that, you first have to understand just how long of a game they were playing. I mean, look at this. Their story stretches over 300 years. It all kicks off in 1410 with a risky bet on the papacy, hits a peak in 1569 when they're officially crowned royalty, and only wraps up in 1737. That is an incredible run. And it all started with one single, incredibly bold gamble. And that first big move, it wasn't an investment in land or armies or anything like that. No, it was in the highest office in all of Christendom. This is the story of how the Medici learned to turn cold, hard cash into unimaginable power. Okay, so you have to picture the scene. It's the early 1400s, and Europe is a total mess. The Catholic Church itself is completely broken. There isn't just one pope, there are 3 of them, all claiming they're the real deal, all backed by different armies and kingdoms. It's absolute chaos. Now, while pretty much everyone else just saw chaos, the head of the family, Giovanni di Medici de' Medici, he saw a golden opportunity. And this right here is a perfect example of what we can call generational chess. It's this brilliant, long-term strategy of making moves that wouldn't just pay off for him, but for his kids and his grandkids. So, Giovanni's plan was nothing short of a masterpiece. First, he found the most ambitious, most ruthless guy he could, a former pirate named Baldassare Cosa. Then he just opened up the Medici Bank and started buying the loyalty of powerful cardinals. And you know what? The gamble worked. Cosa became Pope John XXIII, and as a thank you, he basically handed the Medici the keys to the entire Vatican Bank. Just like that, they became God's bankers. So now, with all the Vatican's wealth pouring through their bank, the Medici are richer than ever. And this massive fortune gets passed down to Giovanni's son, Cosimo. But Cosimo, he wasn't content just counting money. He wanted to build a legacy in stone, in paint, in art. He wanted to remake the entire city of Florence in his own image. But here's the thing. When you get that powerful, you make enemies. The old money ruling family of Florence, the Albizzi, they saw Cosimo as a huge threat. You could feel it in the air. A coup was brewing, and Cosimo's grand vision was about to face its biggest challenge yet. In 1433, the Albizzi made their move. They accused Cosimo of treason and had him banished from the city. They probably thought, job done. But they were terrible rulers. They nearly bankrupted the city, and so just 1 year later, the people of Florence had had enough. They invited Cosimo to come back, not just as a citizen, but as a conquering hero. Coming back to Florence as its undisputed leader, Cosimo could finally start his real work. He poured the family's insane fortune into art and architecture, funding the geniuses who would go on to define an entire era. He single-handedly turned Florence into the glittering heart of the Renaissance. It's no wonder they called him Pater Patriae, father of the fatherland. Cosimo's incredible legacy of power and patronage passed to his grandson, Lorenzo. Everyone called him the Magnificent for his charisma and his incredible taste. But Lorenzo's rule would be tested by a bloody conspiracy, an attack that was designed to wipe the Medici family off the map for good. Okay, let's set the scene. The date is April 26, 1478. You're inside the massive Florence Cathedral. Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano are attending High Mass, but hiding in the crowd are assassins hired by a rival family, the Papacy, and they're backed by the Pope himself. The signal to strike? The moment the bells ring during communion. The attack was incredibly fast and unbelievably brutal. Giuliano was stabbed 19 times. He died right there on the cathedral floor. But Lorenzo, reacting in a split second, used his cloak like a shield, actually fought off his attackers, and managed to escape into a side room, wounded but alive. So, the Papacy conspiracy, it was a complete disaster. Instead of destroying the Medici, it turned Lorenzo into a living legend. The people of Florence rallied behind him, his enemies were crushed, and with his power now totally secure, he kicked off the city's golden age, discovering and supporting young talents like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. Now, after Lorenzo died, the family was actually exiled from Florence, again. But the Medici always had another card to play, another path to power. This time, the papacy itself. And this goes right back to that idea of generational chess. Lorenzo had managed to get his son, Giovanni, appointed a cardinal at the absolutely unbelievable age of just 13. Think about that. He was planting his own bloodline directly into the heart of the Vatican, playing a long game that was about to pay off in a huge way. And oh, did it pay off. In 1513, Giovanni was elected Pope Leo X. The problem was his spending was out of control, especially on rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica. So, to raise cash, he massively increased the sale of these things called indulgences. It was basically a way for people to pay the church to get their sins forgiven. Well, this whole practice really outraged a German monk by the name of Martin Luther. He saw it as a total corruption of faith. So he wrote up his 95 Theses, a blistering attack on the idea of indulgences, and, as the story goes, nailed it to a church door. In doing that, he accidentally lit the fuse of the Protestant Reformation, a crisis that would split the Christian world in two. Even with all the chaos of the Reformation, the Medici eventually got control of Florence back. But their ambition had grown. They weren't satisfied being the city's unofficial rulers anymore. No, they wanted a crown. It was time to become actual royalty. And the man who pulled this off was Cosimo I. He was a distant cousin, and he was put in power at just 17 because everyone thought he'd be an easy puppet to control. They were so wrong. He outsmarted all his rivals, conquered the enemy city of Siena, and in 1569 he was crowned by the Pope as the first Grand Duke of Tuscany. The bankers had finally become monarchs. And yet, somehow, that wasn't even their peak. The family's ultimate height of power wasn't in Florence, it was in Paris. Through a clever marriage and a crazy series of events, Catherine de' Medici became the Queen Regent of France. Let that sink in. A Medici wasn't just running a city-state anymore. She was on the throne of France, one of the most powerful nations in the world. This was their absolute apex. But as we all know, what goes up must come down. After reaching these unbelievable heights, the dynasty began its long, slow, and inevitable decline. In the end, it wasn't a rival family or a foreign invasion that brought the Medici down. It was simple biology. After a few pretty ineffective rulers, the very last Medici Grand Duke, Gian Gastone, died in 1737. He had no son, no heir to pass the title to, and just like that, the direct Medici line that have ruled for centuries was simply gone. So, what's the takeaway here? Were they ruthless tyrants who bent cities and even the church to their will? Or were they geniuses who funded the most beautiful art in history and basically architected the modern world? You know, maybe the real answer is that they were both. And it's that contradiction, that complex legacy, that makes their stories so absolutely fascinating.